So I want to talk about something that is kind of a pet peeve of mine that I'd like everybody to get in the habit of doing. When you create something in Illustrator, you're naturally just going to start just going, just creating stuff, drawing things all over the place. You're going to get to a point where that becomes a really bad habit to get into, because if you don't keep track of things and organize things, then you're going to drive yourself crazy. Even worse, if you pass that file on to someone else and they have to try to sift through and figure out what is going on with your tangled mess, it's really going to drive everybody nuts. So today I really want to talk about organizing things in layers and groups and naming those objects. For example, something that seems rather simple, a series of drawings of pens and different art tools that I did a few weeks ago, they can get very complicated. I've got two different layers here. One adds some color. But if you get in here, you can see that there starts to be a lot of different things going on. Each one of these lines, if I were to break this down and ungroup that, each one of these lines is its own line. If I started to ungroup all of these things like that, you can see that this layers palette just goes on forever. It's over here. Looks like this. If you can't find it, you can go to Windows, Layers, and pull that up. So the first thing you want to know, working with layers, palettes, and groups and organization within Illustrator, is watch what happens over here in the layers palette as I begin to create objects. Any type of shape, any line that I create, any shape that I build with the pen tool itself, any text that I write. See, it all creates its own little object over here on the layers palette. Now, if you want to keep track of these things, maybe some of them can be grouped by pressing Apple G. Notice that those jumped into a group. You can still see them individually. You still select them individually. If you select a group, an item in a group with your black arrow tool selects the entire group. If you select an item in a group with your white arrow tool, it just selects that single object. So groups are very useful. So you grab this whole group, you can resize the whole thing, do whatever with it. Now let's say that you want have a group within a group. You can do that. You can grab objects and drag them into the group. You can select it, see they're all in that group. You can also have groups within groups. So let's say I just want this one, hold Shift, and this one to be in a group. You can right click and press group or Apple G. Now these groups are within a group. I might call that something. Okay, but these objects are in the group as well. So sometimes that can be kind of confusing. You grab the whole thing, it'll move around. But what if I just want to grab this square? You can also go into isolation mode. Double click. Now check over here. As I double clicked, it goes into isolation mode. Now I can select these two objects. Let's make these a different color. So now I can select these two objects independently of each other. And this group is still its own group within this group. And I can double click again. And you have this little breadcrumb trail up here. That tells you that you're in layer 1 in the group called something. Just to get out, you can click on either of these or just double click on a blank space in your artboard. And now we're back to our normal layers palette. Ungrouping something is super easy. Just highlight the group, right click and choose ungroup, and it ungroups it. Or highlight the group and press Apple Shift G. That ungroups it as well. Naming things is really important. Take my icon set for example. I wanted to come in here and name this group. I find which one is selected, which is going to have that dot next to it. Double click on the text and write mechanical. Hit return. Good to go. Let's name this brush. Double click. Brush. Now let's say that I wanted to put all of the drafting pens, which would include that guy, onto its own different layer. So first I would create another layer, which is this button down here. I'm going to name this layer Drafting Pens. Now, I'm going to grab all of these guys. I'm going to send them to the front. You can do that by right-clicking, going to Arrange, Bring to Front, or I like hotkeys, so I use the hotkeys on that, Command-Shift, right bracket. Bring those to the front. Notice it brings them to the top. I can send them to the back. Brings them to the bottom. I can step them up one at a time. Just different things like that. What that actually does, I'll show you real quick, is if you have these objects like this, if I take this object, I can step it back once or twice, or I can step it all the way to the front or all the way to the back. It's just a way to arrange objects. Right-click, Arrange. That's what that is. Now, if I want to move objects to a different layer, I select on that layer, the layer that we've marked drafting pens, right-click on it, go to Arrange, and now that because I have a different layer selected than the one I'm actually on, I can send that to the current layer. That means the one that's selected, and it jumps all of those objects right up there. So maybe I want to name this one slightly different because it's got the cap on. Now I know whenever I want to grab all of my drafting pens, I can just grab that one layer. It selects all of those drafting pens. One last thing that can be kind of helpful is showing and hiding and locking layers. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The eye showing is showing, the eye disappearing is hidden, right? So I can hide and show different layers. Now let's say that I wanted to color these layers, but I didn't want to bother arranging things. So I wanted to make sure that always the object's lines were on top. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, let's color this Wacom pen here. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to lock this layer, then I'm going to go on a layer underneath, and I'm going to start adding color underneath, and let's watch what happens. I'm going to use the blob brush tool. I can come in, and it looks like it's on top as I'm starting it, but when I let go, it's actually underneath. So I can just come in and just color this in. It'll stay underneath that object. Get out the eraser tool to get rid of some of that. And it's locked. So everything on that layer is locked, so I can't even select it. If you don't want to lock an entire layer, you can also lock a specific object. So let's unlock this. Let's go find our Wacom tablet there. Name it Wacom pen. And I just want to lock just this. I can just lock that specific object. So as you're going, remember to name things, keep them organized, group things that make sense to be grouped, arrange them correctly, and put things on layers. Your life will be a lot easier when you start getting into the more complicated or object-heavy types of things. Especially if you start outlining fonts, changing them into objects and ungrouping them. A ton of objects. So stay organized.